Have you ever had one of those neighbors? You know the type, the ones who seem to have a rule book for a backbone and a megaphone for a voice, especially when they're draped in the oh-so-important mantle of an HOA committee. Well, I'm Arthur Jenkins, and I had the misfortune of encountering the queen of them all. This isn't just a story about a petty dispute over a driveway. It's about how one woman's arrogance and obsession with control nearly blew up our entire neighborhood. Literally. It's a wild ride, and it all started so quietly. So, grab your popcorn and let me know in the comments below, where are you watching from? And have you ever had an HOA president who made your life a living nightmare? I'm betting some of you have stories that could rival mine. The scent of Martha's roses still clung to the air in Willow Creek Estates, or perhaps it was just my memory playing tricks on me. It had been 6 months since I'd lost her, and the quiet cul-de-sac house, the one we'd picked out for its promise of peaceful retirement, felt cavernous and empty. Arthur Jenkins, a retired civil engineer who'd spent 40 years wrestling with concrete, steel, and immovable bureaucracy, now found myself adrift. My days were measured by the slow creep of shadows across the lawn I meticulously kept, a tribute to Martha's love for gardening. The driveway, admittedly, was original to the house, 20 years old, a patchwork of asphalt with a few character lines, like an aging face. It was sound, I knew that much, but it wasn't pristine. It didn't bother me. I was seeking solace, not showroom perfection. Then Eleanor Vance, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, descended upon my tranquil, if somewhat melancholic, existence. She arrived with a welcoming smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and a binder thick enough to stun a small animal. "Mr. Jenkins, isn't it? Welcome to Willow Creek," she'd chirped, her voice a little too bright, a little too forceful. Her gaze, however, wasn't on me. It was already cataloging my property, a silent, swift judgment. Within minutes, she was pointing out the slight discoloration on my mailbox post and the irregular edging of my flower beds. I thanked her, a knot tightening in my stomach. This is not going to be peaceful, is it? I thought. The official notice arrived a week later, crisp and impersonal, delivered with the smug finality of a death sentence for my quiet life. My driveway, it declared in bold, officious type, was aesthetically unacceptable and not in keeping with community standards. It needed to be completely repaved. Not repaired, mind you, but ripped out and replaced. And the kicker? I had 30 days to comply, using one specific contractor, Prestige Paving, her preferred vendor, at a cost that made my eyes water. The bylaw cited was a vague, catch-all phrase about maintaining property values and visual harmony. My cracked but perfectly functional driveway was apparently a threat to the neighborhood's chi. This wasn't just a notice. It was a declaration of war, and I, still raw from Martha's loss, was its unwilling conscript. My initial reaction was a weary sigh. Another battle, when all I craved was armistice. I considered just paying it, making the problem go away. But Martha's voice echoed in my mind. Don't let bullies push you around. Arthur, she'd had a spine of pure steel beneath her gentle exterior. And then there was the engineer in me, the part that bristled at inefficiency and arbitrary demands. I retrieved the HOA covenants and bylaws Eleanor had so generously provided. Hours later, surrounded by highlighted pages and scribbled notes, I found what I was looking for, a distinct lack of specificity regarding driveway conditions beyond good repair and safe condition. Mine was both. I drafted a polite letter to the HOA board, care of Madam President Vance, outlining my findings. I stated that my driveway, while not new, was structurally sound and posed no hazard. I offered to have the cracks professionally sealed and even proposed getting competitive bids for a full replacement, should they insist, though I questioned the necessity. Her reply was swift and dismissive, a handwritten scrawl at the bottom of my returned letter. Mr. Jenkins, aesthetic standards are determined by the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair. Your driveway is an eyesore. Prestige Paving is our approved vendor for ensuring quality. Comply by the deadline. Avance no discussão, no compromise. Rules are rules, imagine her saying, and I am the rules. That condescension, That utter disregard for a reasonable approach was like a splash of cold water. The grief that had muted my spirit began to recede, replaced by a familiar, steely resolve. All right, Eleanor, I thought, if it's a fight you want, it's a fight you'll get. But we'll do it my way, with facts and precision. My old skills, dormant since retirement, began to stir. I pulled out my camera and documented every inch of my driveway, every crack, every undulation, cross-referencing with date stamp photos. I then took a quiet stroll around Willow Creek, camera in hand, discreetly photographing other driveways, many in similar or worse condition than mine, yet apparently not deemed aesthetically unacceptable. I noted which ones had the telltale sheen of recent, expensive-looking work from Prestige Paving. Then, I dug into Prestige Paving itself. A few online searches revealed a pattern: glowing testimonials from a handful of Willow Creek addresses, interspersed with scathing reviews from outside the community, citing overpricing, shoddy work, and aggressive sales tactics. Red flags were popping up like dandelions in an untended lawn. I began to meticulously review the HOA's publicly available financial statements from the past few years. It was dry reading, but patterns started to emerge. Payments to Prestige Paving were frequent and substantial, often for community improvements that seemed vaguely described. The engineer in me, the one who'd overseen multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects, smelled something fishy. The cost per square foot for their asphalt work, even based on their quotes to me, seemed inflated by at least 30% compared to regional averages. Where's all that extra money going, Eleanor? I wondered. My preliminary investigation was no longer just about my driveway. It was about the potential misuse of community funds. I was beginning to suspect my little patch of asphalt was just a pawn in a much larger, more lucrative game for someone. One Saturday morning, while I was examining a particularly wide crack near my curb, more of a geological feature than a simple fissure, a voice startled me. Admiring Eleanor's handiwork, are we? I turned to see an older woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile, leaning on her garden gate across the street. This was Margaret Ainsworth, a resident of Willow Creek for over 30 years. I'm Margaret, she said, extending a hand. And you must be Mr. Jenkins. Heard you were having a bit of a discussion with our dear president about your driveway. A bit of a discussion is putting it mildly, Margaret, I replied, relieved to find a potentially sympathetic ear. She wants it ripped out and replaced by her pet contractor. Says it's an eyesore. Margaret chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. Eleanor Vance and her eyesores. She's been running this HOA like her own personal kingdom for the last 5 years. I was secretary on the board when she first got elected. Lasted 6 months. Couldn't stomach her methods, this was gold. Margaret, it turned out, was a veritable archive of Eleanor's reign, possessing a keen memory for past skirmishes, bylaw manipulations, and Eleanor's increasingly autocratic style. She explained how Eleanor had systematically pushed out dissenting voices, stacked the board with allies, and amended bylaws to consolidate her power, often with minimal notice to residents. She thrives on control, Arthur, Margaret said, her expression serious. And she hates being questioned. Be careful. A few days later, I attended my first HOA meeting. It was a sparsely attended affair, mostly Eleanor and 2 board members who nodded along to her pronouncements like well-trained show dogs. When I tried to politely raise the issue of my driveway and the selective enforcement of aesthetic standards, Eleanor cut me off. Mr. Jenkins, this matter is closed. We expect compliance. As I was leaving, feeling frustrated, a younger man approached me. Mr. Jenkins? I'm David Chun from down the street. I heard what you said in there. Good on you for speaking up, David. It turned out was a software developer in his late 30s, recently fined by Eleanor for installing unapproved solar-powered accent lights along his walkway. Lights that were practically invisible during the day and cast a gentle, tasteful glow at night. She called them tacky and a nuisance, David said, rolling his eyes. I think she just likes the power trip. David was tech-savvy and shared my indignation. An alliance was forming. Margaret brought the historical knowledge and wisdom. David, the digital acumen, and youthful energy. I brought my engineering mind and a growing determination. Our little trio began to meet discreetly. Margaret unearthed old HOA minutes, highlighting meetings where crucial bylaw changes were rushed through with suspiciously low attendance or vague agendas. She recalled specific instances where Eleanor had overridden previous board decisions or ignored expert advice that didn't suit her narrative. David, meanwhile, put his research skills to work. He delved deeper into Prestige Paving, discovering that its owner, a man named Marcus Thorne, was Eleanor Vance's brother-in-law. Bingo! This wasn't just preference. It was nepotism, almost certainly involving kickbacks. He also found online property records showing Thorne had recently purchased a vacation home shortly after Prestige Paving landed a series of large contracts with our HOA. The circumstantial evidence was piling up. Arthur, the engineer, started scrutinizing the community improvement projects undertaken by Prestige. He noted that a recently repaved communal walkway already showed signs of alligator cracking, a classic indicator of a too thin asphalt layer or a poorly prepared subgrade. Shoddy work, high prices, familial connections. It was a textbook case of someone lining their pockets. Eleanor, however, was not one to be trifled with, or so she thought. Perhaps she sensed the growing undercurrent of dissent, or maybe my quiet defiance simply enraged her. The violation notices for my driveway now arrived daily, each one adding another $50 to a rapidly accumulating imaginary fine. In the HOA's latest newsletter, a thinly veiled paragraph appeared, warning residents about disruptive individuals who seek to undermine community harmony for personal reasons. At the next HOA meeting, when I attempted to present my initial findings about Prestige Paving's pricing and the potential conflict of interest, Eleanor's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Mr. Jenkins, your accusations are baseless and frankly slanderous," she boomed, her voice echoing in the nearly empty community hall. "Your driveway is an eyesore and a safety hazard. You will comply with the HOA directive, or we will take further action, including forcing the work and placing a lien on your property. Is that clear?" Her threat hung in the air, a clear attempt at intimidation. A safety hazard? I thought. My driveway. Eleanor, you have no idea what a real safety hazard looks like, but you might be about to find out. The threat of a lien was a serious escalation. It meant Eleanor was willing to go to extremes. "We need a proper plan," I said to Margaret and David during our next clandestine meeting in my sunroom, overlooking the very driveway that had become the unlikely battlefield. "She's not going to back down with polite inquiries." Margaret, ever the pragmatist, nodded. "She's cornered, or at least feels like it. That's when she's most dangerous. We need to go beyond just pointing out her misdeeds. We need irrefutable proof and a way to reach the other residents." David, tapping away on his laptop, looked up. "I can set up a secure, anonymous online forum for Willow Creek residents. A place where people can share their own stories about Eleanor and the HOA, post photos, documents, without immediate fear of retaliation. If enough people speak up, it'll show this isn't just your fight, Arthur." "Excellent, David," I said. "Knowledge is power, and right now, Eleanor controls the information flow. My engineering mind was already breaking the problem down into manageable components." "Margaret, you mentioned a retired lawyer in the community, Thomas Pirelli. Do you think he'd be willing to offer some advice, perhaps pro bono, on the legality of Eleanor's actions, especially the lien threat and the vague bylaws she's using?" "Tom's a good man," Margaret affirmed. "He had his own run-in with Eleanor over a tree on his property a few years back. I'm sure he'd at least listen." "Good. While you two work on that," I continued, "I'm going to commission an independent engineering assessment of my driveway. Not just my opinion, but a certified report from a licensed professional engineer specializing in pavements. Let's see her argue with that. It'll formally document its condition, its compliance with actual county codes, and provide recommendations for sensible repair, not just her brother-in-law's gold-plated replacement." I also decided it was time to formally request a full audit of the HOA's financials for the past 5 years, citing concerns over non-transparent contractor selection and potential conflicts of interest. The bylaws Margaret had discovered allowed for such a request if petitioned by a certain percentage of homeowners. David's forum would be crucial in gathering those signatures. Meanwhile, Eleanor, oblivious or perhaps overconfident due to our outwardly quiet approach, was forging ahead with her own agenda. She announced a new community beautification initiative, the centerpiece of which was the repaving of a long, winding asphalt pathway that snaked through a common greenbelt area. And who was awarded the no-bid contract? Prestige Paving, naturally. I knew that pathway. It ran directly over a major utility easement, clearly marked on the community plot plans I had studied. There were gas lines, water mains, and fiber optic cables buried there. Any significant digging or heavy equipment operation would require careful coordination with utility companies, proper marking of underground lines, the call before you dig, 811 service was mandatory, and specific permits. She wouldn't be that reckless, would she? David asked, his brow furrowed, when I pointed this out on the plot plan. With Eleanor, never underestimate her capacity to prioritize appearances and her own agenda over due diligence. Margaret sighed. She'll bully Marcus Thorne into starting quickly. Probably tell him it's just a simple resurfacing, no deep digging involved. I felt a chill. Resurfacing might be fine, but if Thorne's crew decides to cut corners on subgrade preparation, or if they need to adjust drainage, they could easily hit something. And knowing their track record from David's research, my sentence trailed off. The stakes were quietly, terrifyingly ratcheting up. Eleanor's crusade for aesthetic perfection, fueled by greed and arrogance, was now steering the neighborhood towards a potential, very real, hazard. Her focus was on my eyesore of a driveway, while she was about to commission work that could genuinely endanger lives and property. The irony wasn't lost on me. Your obsession with the superficial is going to bite you, Eleanor, I thought. It might bite all of us. The fines for my driveway continued to pile up. Eleanor, through the HOA's lawyer, sent David a cease and desist letter regarding his fledgling online forum, claiming it was defamatory and spreading misinformation. The letter was aggressive, filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate. Margaret reported that she'd received an anonymous, vaguely threatening note in her mailbox about meddling in HOA affairs and stirring up trouble. Eleanor was lashing out, trying to silence any opposition. Instead of deterring us, it galvanized our resolve. This was no longer just about financial impropriety or a petty abuse of power. It was about intimidation and a dangerous disregard for safety. The independent engineering report on my driveway arrived. It was thorough, professional, and damning to Eleanor's claims. It stated in no uncertain terms that my driveway was structurally sound, in fair to good condition, consistent with its age, and compliant with all relevant county codes. Minor crack sealing recommended for extended life. Full replacement not warranted at this time. It also included a cost estimate for the recommended sealing, about 5% of what Prestige Paving wanted for a full replacement. I had my ammunition. David's online forum, despite the cease and desist, was gaining traction. Anonymity emboldened residents. Stories poured in. Fines for trash cans left out an hour too long. Demands to repaint front doors specific, unappealing shades of beige, aggressive warnings about children's chalk drawings on sidewalks. A pattern of pettiness and overreach emerged, all pointing back to Eleanor. We quickly gathered more than enough digital signatures to formally petition for the financial audit and to call a special HOA meeting to discuss the governance and financial transparency of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The day of the special HOA meeting arrived. It was a stark contrast to the usual sparsely attended affairs. David's forum had done its work. The community hall was packed, a sea of concerned and disgruntled faces. Eleanor, flanked by her two loyal board members, looked visibly unsettled by the turnout. Her usual imperious demeanor was tinged with a nervous energy. I was slated to speak first. I calmly presented the findings of the independent engineering report on my driveway, projecting key excerpts onto a screen. I then outlined the numerous other complaints gathered via the forum, showcasing a pattern of arbitrary enforcement and financial concerns, carefully avoiding accusatory language, letting the facts speak for themselves. I formally submitted the petition for a full financial audit. We are not asking for a revolution, I concluded. We are asking for transparency, fairness, and responsible governance, as per our own bylaws. A wave of murmurs and applause rippled through the room. Eleanor stood up, her face tight with fury. She attempted to discredit my report, calling it one man's opinion, and reiterating her mantra about maintaining standards. She dismissed the residents' concerns as misunderstandings and exaggerations fanned by troublemakers. Her voice was getting louder, more shrill. This HOA is functioning perfectly well under my leadership, and Prestige Paving is an excellent, reputable contractor who... It was at that precise moment that the first distant wail of a siren cut through her tirade. Then another, closer this time. Heads turned. A nervous buzz filled the room. Someone's phone rang, then another. A man near the front stood up, his face pale. My wife just called. She says there's a gas leak down by the Greenbelt path. They're evacuating houses on Oak Lane. Chaos. The meeting dissolved as people scrambled for their phones, rushing towards the doors. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her denunciation of my troublemaking dying on her lips. A gas leak? She stammered, looking bewildered. That's where Prestige Paving is working today on the pathway. But it's just a small repair, they assured me. Her voice trailed off as the wail of approaching fire trucks grew deafening. The beautification project, her pet project, rushed into service by her favored, inept contractor, had just become a disaster. My little driveway war had just been catastrophically overshadowed. The scene outside the community hall was one of controlled panic. More emergency vehicles were arriving, fire trucks, police cars, and soon, the ominous white vans of the gas company. A visible plume, like heat haze but smelling distinctly of mercaptan, was rising from the direction of the Greenbelt. Residents from the affected streets were milling about, fear and confusion on their faces. Eleanor Vance was trying to take charge, barking orders at a bewildered-looking police officer, but her authority was evaporating as quickly as the leaking gas. "It's a minor incident," she declared to anyone who would listen, her voice strained. "Prestige Paving has it under control. They are professionals. Professionals who just hit a gas line," I thought grimly. My engineering instincts kicked in. I knew this area. I knew the prevailing winds. "Folks, let's move further upwind," I called out, my voice carrying with an authority born of experience, not bluster. "Away from the low-lying areas. If you're on Oak Lane or Willow Trace, make sure your neighbors are out." People, desperate for direction, started to listen. I saw David and Margaret coordinating, helping to guide elderly residents to safer spots. The gas company crews, grim-faced and efficient, were now on site, working frantically to shut off the ruptured main. Firefighters were hosing down the area to prevent ignition. It was clear this was no minor incident. Eleanor, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly agitated, her attempts to manage the situation only highlighting her incompetence. She tried to accost a fire captain, demanding to know why it was taking so long. He brushed past her with a curt, "Ma'am, we have a critical situation here. Please stay back." The carefully constructed facade of Eleanor Vance, pillar of the community, was crumbling before our very eyes. Her obsession with the aesthetic perfection of my driveway seemed laughably insignificant now, a footnote to the real and present danger she had, through her negligence, unleashed. The turning point wasn't just in the HOA meeting. It was here, amidst the sirens and the smell of gas, where her reign of error was being laid bare for all to see. The tension was palpable. Every spark, every engine revving, felt like a potential catastrophe. My meticulous planning for the HOA meeting had been about exposing financial and procedural rot. I never imagined the climax would be so visceral, so immediately dangerous. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of investigations and recriminations. The gas company's preliminary report, released within days, was damning. Prestige Paving, under pressure from Eleanor to expedite the beautification project, had indeed failed to call 811 to have utility lines properly marked before commencing excavation. They had used a small backhoe deemed inappropriate for work near known sensitive utilities and had struck a 4-inch natural gas main. Proper permits for that level of excavation had not been obtained. Eleanor had apparently assured Marcus Thorne that since it was just pathway resurfacing on HOA property, the usual city permits were a needless bureaucratic delay, her words, as recalled by a very nervous Thorne during the initial inquiry. The local news, initially reporting on a gas line rupture, quickly picked up on the HOA angle. Willow Creek HOA president's rush job leads to neighborhood evacuation, one headline blared. Another, more pointedly, nepotism and negligence? Questions arise as HOA-favored contractor strikes gas line David, ever resourceful, had anonymously leaked some of his research on the Eleanor Thorne connection and Prestige Paving's spotty record to a local investigative reporter. My independent engineering report on my driveway, and Eleanor's dismissal of it, suddenly became a symbol of her broader pattern of ignoring expert advice and due diligence in favor of her own agenda and preferred connected vendors. The financial implications for the HOA were staggering. The gas company billed for emergency repairs. The county cited the HOA for multiple code violations. Several residents whose properties were closest to the rupture reported foundation cracks and other damages from the ground vibration and subsequent repair work, threatening lawsuits. The HOA's insurance provider sent a steely letter indicating they were investigating whether gross negligence on the part of the HOA leadership might invalidate their coverage for the incident. Suddenly, the fight over my $10,000 driveway replacement seemed like pocket change. Eleanor Vance's downfall was swift and brutal. An emergency HOA board meeting was convened, not by her, but by the remaining 2 board members who were now desperately trying to distance themselves from their former leader. Faced with overwhelming evidence of her mismanagement, her clear conflict of interest with Prestige Paving, and her direct role in circumventing safety protocols, Eleanor had no defense. Even her most ardent supporters on the board had abandoned ship. She was given a stark choice: resign immediately or face a formal vote of no confidence and removal, along with potential personal liability lawsuits from the HOA itself. Her reign, built on bluster and petty tyranny, ended not with a bang, but with a whimpered signature on a resignation letter. Prestige Paving was suspended from all city and county work, pending a full state licensing board review. Marcus Thorne's vacation home suddenly seemed less of a retreat and more of a rapidly depreciating asset. For me, there was a quiet, profound sense of vindication. My driveway, the initial locus of conflict, was forgotten in the maelstrom of Eleanor's larger, more dangerous folly. Residents who had once perhaps viewed me as a stubborn newcomer now approached me with respect, some with outright apologies for not speaking up sooner. "You try to warn us, Arthur," one neighbor said, shaking my head. We should have listened. My methodical, fact-based approach, once dismissed by Eleanor as troublemaking, was now seen as a hallmark of sanity and foresight. The daily fines, the threats of a lien, all vanished like morning mist. Justice in this case hadn't just been served. It had arrived via a ruptured gas main, a rather dramatic, if unintended, delivery system. With Eleanor gone, a void opened in the HOA leadership. An interim committee was quickly formed, comprised of concerned residents who, just weeks before, wouldn't have dared challenge the status quo. Margaret, with her deep institutional knowledge, was a natural choice. David Chun, with his communication skills and newfound community engagement, stepped up eagerly. To my surprise and initial reluctance, I was asked to serve as an advisor, particularly on matters related to infrastructure, contracts, and oversight. Me, the quiet retiree who just wanted to tend his roses? But Martha's voice echoed again. "When you see something wrong, Arthur, you have a duty to try and make it right." And so I agreed. Our first task was daunting: damage control. We worked with the gas company to ensure all repairs were up to code and that safety protocols were rigorously implemented for any future work. We initiated the full financial audit I had petitioned for, which quickly uncovered a series of questionable payments to Prestige Paving and other favored vendors of Eleanor's. The findings were turned over to legal counsel. New bylaws were drafted, emphasizing transparency in all HOA dealings, mandatory competitive bidding for contracts over a certain amount, stricter conflict of interest rules, and easier mechanisms for resident oversight and recall of board members. David's online forum became an official channel for HOA communication, fostering a level of resident engagement Willow Creek had never seen. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, old grudges, and a deep-seated mistrust of HOA authority that Eleanor had fostered. But slowly, painstakingly, we began to rebuild. The pathway near the gas line was eventually repaired, this time by a reputable contractor, with all permits in place and utility lines clearly marked. It cost more up front, but it was done right. My own driveway? I had the cracks sealed by a local handyman for a couple of $100. It still wasn't showroom perfect, but it was safe, functional, and more importantly, it was mine, free from the shadow of Eleanor's arbitrary dictates. The long-term outcomes were transformative. Willow Creek Estates, once a neighborhood simmering with quiet resentment under an autocratic HOA president, became a more engaged, cohesive community. People started talking to each other again, not just about HOA issues, but about their lives, their gardens, their kids. I even started a small community vegetable garden project on a disused patch of common land, something Martha would have loved. It became a gathering spot, a place where neighbors connected over tomatoes and zucchinis, not violation notices. The fear that Eleanor had cultivated was replaced by a sense of shared ownership and responsibility. As for Eleanor Vance, the audit revealed enough irregularities that the HOA's lawyers advised her to make a significant settlement to avoid further legal action from the association itself. Facing potential personal lawsuits from residents impacted by the gas line incident and universal ostracism within Willow Creek, she quietly put her house on the market and moved away. Her meticulously maintained lawn and aesthetically perfect facade couldn't hide the tarnish on her reputation. Marcus Thorne's Prestige Paving eventually declared bankruptcy, its name synonymous with shoddy work and reckless endangerment. Their comeuppance was thorough, a direct result of their own greed and incompetence, beautifully amplified by Eleanor's blind faith in her own authority. Isn't it something how a person so obsessed with superficial perfection can cause such actual, tangible chaos? Sometimes, I'll admit, a small, dry chuckle escapes me when I think about it. So, that's the story of how a fight over a cracked driveway escalated into a full-blown gas line disaster and ultimately led to the liberation of an entire neighborhood. It taught me that even in retirement, one's skills and experiences can find new purpose. It taught our community that vigilance is essential, that unchecked power, even on the small stage of an HOA, can have serious consequences. And it reaffirmed what Martha always believed, that ordinary people standing together for what's right can indeed move mountains, or, in this case, a particularly stubborn and corrupt HOA president. It just goes to show you never know what battles lie ahead, even in the quietest of suburbs. But when faced with injustice, sometimes the most unassuming person, armed with a bit of knowledge and a lot of persistence, can make all the difference. My driveway is still just a driveway, but it's a reminder that sometimes the biggest fights start with the smallest cracks. And the victory isn't just about winning. It's about the peace and community you build in the aftermath. I dedicate this small victory and the newfound peace in Willow Creek to Martha. She always knew I had it in me. What do you all think? Has a small issue ever ballooned into something huge in your own lives or communities? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for listening.